Okay, back on part 15 here of the single-ended amplifier build. I have mounted the two cathode resistors here using two existing holes I had here on the side that were going to originally hold the chokes. So that worked out quite well. And really what we're going to do now at this point is just wire everything here up. But you got to keep in mind, everything that you see here has to be done twice. So if you remember this stage right here, we're actually going to use it because it says half of a 6SN7. We're going to use a whole 6SN7, one for the left channel, one for the right channel. And I have chosen this one to be that. And the reason is it's closest to the inputs over here. So as we come in, and I'm going to snake that all the way around, by the way, to avoid getting in near the power supply or this inductor here, choke. And so that'll be the first tube. And then the second tube, half of a tube, half of a tube, that'll be this one. So this would be like your left channel. And then you'll have to repeat that again for the right channel. And then you'll have to do this whole piece right here, both for this tube and this tube over here. So even though the schematic only shows really one channel, we've got to put in both. Thought I'd start by getting rid of the remaining wires here. And the blue-white is the screen tap, and the red tap is the B+. And I was just studying this thing a little bit, and you'll see the B+ goes right here at the top of the output transformer, feeds through, ends up going to the plate on the other side. But nowhere here does it show using the screen tap. Matter of fact, you're tapping off of the B+, coming over through a 15K resistor, stacking up through these Zeners here to feed the kind of the screen voltage there. So looks like I can cut those blue and white wires off and kind of heat shrink them up and get them out of the way. And then we're going to connect the B+ up here. Okay, we've got the red wire wired across over here, tied into the 450 volt spot right here. The other red wire comes out of this transformer, comes around and goes here, and then both of the white and blues I cut off and heat shrunk and just kind of took the wires away. So it's not the most beautiful amp I've ever seen, but it's, I would say, average or above average maybe. I'm pretty happy with how it's turning out. Okay, it might be hard to see here, but I've been soldering the 456 and 127. Maybe that makes it a little easier to see it in series with each other, and that's a lot harder to do than you would think it is, believe it or not. But I believe I've got them all soldered well. I'm going to heat shrink these things from one end to the other just to kind of keep them together and to keep them, you know, any tension or whatnot from breaking them along the way. One thing to note is you only need to do this once. I talked about all of this needing to be done twice, but this coming off the 450 volts and then feeding through a 15K and then tying a center point in between that with these Zeners, this 250 volt point right here, you really only need to do this one time. This same 250 volt screen voltage can be used to feed both of the 807s. You know, I have to say I've been extremely happy. I bought a little $35 SMD rework station, but nothing really. All I have used it for is shrinking heat shrink tubing, but it makes it so much easier getting down inside the amplifier and heat shrinking things without, you know, blowing great big areas of air. So you can see this thing's pretty precision. Turn it right off, leave it on the bench. Absolutely love that thing. Okay, I kind of came between ground on this bus here, and because I wanted to keep it as close to the power supply as I could, and I came down here and fed this string of Zener diodes to this point right here, as well as I came through this 15K resistor around and to this point. So I should have 450 volts being fed, dropped across this resistor, brought over here, and then that 250 volt stack should keep it up. If you'll notice, I shrink wrapped this in green, and then on one end I shrink wrapped a little blue on top of that, just to indicate the you know, kind of the stripe here on the Zeners, because it's easy to get that turned around once you've heat shrunk it and not know which end is which. And we tied our 600 microfarad 63 volt Blackgate Nikon cap here to ground and then down to that lug. So we should be able to pull off of that point right now our 250 volt screen supply. Alright, we've got the string of Zeners here tied with the bottom on this tab down here feeding over the 450 volt B plus through this 15K resistor here. We've also tied this capacitor, and I showed this a minute ago and I made a mistake. I put a 63 volt cap right here, not a 400 volt cap, and it didn't last long. We saw smoke. So I've replaced that, and I'm going to keep cruising along. And we've wired both from this 250 volt point here to both pin number 2 here, the screens on both of these output tubes. And up next we needed to feed from basically ground here on the bus up through this 390 ohm 10 watt resistor to pin number 4, the cathode, as well as electrolytic good solid black gate going from, and this is the 63 volt cap that I used in the wrong place over here a minute ago. But basically you tie from number 4 then to ground with it as well. And I've done that on both sides. So over here you can see number 4 comes off, comes over here and goes into this resistor, kind of mounted on the side. Then it comes off out of that resistor and goes to ground, as well as from here to ground through this 63 volt 100 microfarad cap. And the same little story over here, coming off number 4 through this resistor back over to ground, and then I've tied this cap over here between number 4 and ground as well. Okay, I'm about to start wiring up the preamp tubes at this point. So a couple things I've done just to keep track. I've marked this left, right, and this is left and right. I've also marked this tube here as left socket and this one over here as right. And then I've also marked this tube as left and this one is right. And this is going to be a combo tube here that does both left and right. So I've come over here on my schematic and I've said, hey, plate number that goes to pin 5 is going to be left, and plate that goes to pin number 2 is going to be right. And I'll do the same thing here with left and right, just to keep things oriented, because it's easy to get crisscrossed as you're working through this kind of stuff. Okay, continuing to move along, the plate load resistor here, the 47K feeding to pins 5 and 2. 47K feeding over here pins 5 and 2. We've also then taken pins 6 and 3 with a 1.5K to ground. So that would be 6 right here and 3 right here, both going to ground. Then we had, let's see, 4 and 1 going to the center wiper of the potentiometer. And these are grid resistors, so typically you want the leads between it and the grids as short as possible. As you can see here, we got our 1K right here feeding over to the center selection off of number 1, and off number 4 here we're feeding straight over here to the center wiper on this pot. So making some progress. Okay, so guess what showed up in the mail here? My 30 microfarad at 500 volt F&T cap, and I'm calling it the Christmas cap because I used a red and white striped wire with some green heat shrink on it to bring the negative can part around and tie it to ground right here. So I feel better now about this whole front end circuit with that thing in place. And let's get back to wiring up these front end tubes. Okay, you can see here I've got to now go from 1 to 5 with a 1K on both of these, and from 3 to 5, which would be here over to here. And so I've cut these things short, ran these inside down here, and we're going to get 2 more across here. Okay, so we have to go 1 to 5 with a 1K, 3 to 5 with a 1K, 1 to 5, 3 to 5, 1 to 5, 3 to 5. Take your time. Takes a little bit of time to get these things down in here nice and neat like this. By the way, these are all Kwame 2 watt resistors. I really like these things. Well, yeah, I'm kind of frustrated with myself. I've only had this amp in the works now for about 5 or 6 months. And I just realized that as I was going to get some caps, I used up all my good 0.33 microfarad. So when I was ordering the list of materials for this thing, I kind of skipped those because I really didn't, because I usually keep lots of those in stock. And it turns out all I have are these 0.3 630 volt poly caps, which are, not bad by any means. They're just not exactly what I was wanting to put in this amp. So I'll likely use these to keep the amp moving along, and then we'll come back around when I have time and kind of replace this. Another thing I've been having, a lot of people comment on my post and kind of say, hey, if it were my amp build, I'd do this, I would do that, and or you could add this or remove that. And I won't disagree that there might be a lot of things I would do different about this design, but I kind of wanted to build it the way that Triode Dick built it to begin with. And then that gives us an opportunity to kind of see how it was meant to be designed. And then from there we could tweak some things. Like I'll give you an example. I would probably add some poly caps across each of these filter caps just to cut out EMF and noise. Somebody mentioned putting a switch in line with the filaments on the 807s so you could let the filaments warm up before you kind of apply the B+, things of that nature, and yeah, all great things. I totally agree. Just wasn't in the original design, so I'm kind of trying to build it the way it was meant to be here, and we'll take it from there. Right, one little change I just made here is I moved this cap from this side of the kind of bus wire here over to the other side. Just kind of flipped it around. Reason being, I'm wanting to use some of the space here to tie off on some of these terminal strips right here. A little hard to see, but there's terminal strips going all the way across there. And I want to use those for the coupling connections. Thought I'd show you a little trick here while I'm working on putting these caps in, but this is just Ptfe wiring. Cut the wire to the length you want to use and get it right first. And then you slide your little Ptfe wire cover over the end. And then all you do is you back this thing up however much here on this end that you want to leave for soldering. And then you can see through this stuff and cut it off right at the very end, the end of your stuff. And when you slide it back down, you've got the right length. It's kind of hard to cut this stuff and get it right otherwise. Okay, up next we had to wire in basically this 30.33 microfarad capacitor over to a point, and then from that point we had to go with a 1K kind of grid stopper resistor here into both the left and right SRPP stages, and then we also had to take a 220K to ground here. And so I did that. I came off pin number 5 here, the plate, and came over and tied to this point, and then from that point you can see I came over with a resistor here, 1K, and tied it to pin number 4 here, the grid. And if you notice, I kept that resistor as close to this terminal as I could, and then from there over here 220 microfarad. And the reason that I brought it back over here to this ground bus versus taking it to this ground bus is I'm trying not to put anything with the preamp tubes tied to this ground bus, because this ground bus eventually makes it over here to this cathode resistor and the power tube. So this is kind of the bus here for the power supply. This is kind of the one for the power tubes, and then this bus line here is being used for the input tubes, and then serially they're all kind of going in that order back to the power supply here. Okay, we've got to tie one side here of this potentiometer to the bus ground here, tied with the input tubes, and that's what I did. I took both sides of that, kind of soldered them together here, and then brought the wire over and tacked it onto this bus. Okay, at this point what we've had to wire up is the 0.33 coupling capacitor coming over here, which I tied to a point that then feeds in via 1K grid resistor here to the 807, and then 100K back to ground here. And if you notice, This kind of separates this 33 microfarad capacitor between this stage and the next stage, so I tied this into the power supply ground bus. So if you'll notice what I did here, I came off of pin number 3 of each of these tubes, came with the 0.33 microfarad coupling cap to this point right here, then the 100K straight up here to this ground bus, and then I used a wire to go across and come over here and tie in here with the 100K grid resistor, and I kept that as close to this pin socket as possible. Same thing here on the other side. So I think that has the tubes wired up at this point. Okay, I was getting ready to connect up the RCA jacks and feed around and feed the first tube here with the inputs, and I just thought for kicks and giggles I would ground one lead of a test probe here, and then the other lead I was just checking to make sure these things weren't touching the chassis, and lo and behold they are on both of them. So I've got to take these ends off here and kind of rework and make sure that the little grommet things here are going through and that the metal here is not touching the holes. So I got a little bit of metal working to do here to get these things right. Apparently the sides here are touching the chassis itself, which creates a problem because you end up grounding your inputs here, and then you end up grounding your inputs over here, which can create a ground loop in your chassis. So I'm going to get the, looks like maybe the Dremel or the some of those step bits out to kind of fix this. Okay, we drilled those out a little better with a kind of one of those step bits, and then we kind of got the plastic inserts in there properly, and now when I test, neither side is grounded to the chassis at this point, which is exactly what you want, because you only want to ground on one end of that wire, not both ends. Okay, I'm making the cables here, and what I'm using, this is actually 2 cables, as you can see here. It's coax of sort, or shielded wire I would call it. Yeah, so there's 2 of them, and what I'm doing is I'm putting heat shrink tubing on it every so many feet. That's going to help me along the way, and I'm not shrunking it, so it'll still slide along at this point as I need it. But as you notice, if you pull the outer sheath off, what you end up with is then a kind of a braid there of silver that you have to kind of work loose then with a screwdriver and kind of pull off and tie it to one side. So I'll end up tying center post ground, and then we'll run that all the way around to the other side down here, where we'll end up taking the shield and tying it to the bus, and then the center points will go to the 2 other ends of this potentiometer down here. By the way, this shielded wire strips the same way the other does. You just get your little thermal heater here, get it on the wire, twist it around on the outer part, pull, and then you can see here the sheath part here. You just have to use a screwdriver to start working that all the way around and kind of undoing the braid as you go. And then you just pull it off on one side here and twist it up. Okay, and you can see here now how I brought these over. The center wire goes in the middle conductor, and then the outer 2 shields actually solder directly to the silver-plated lugs here on the outer parts of the RCA jack. And then I'm going to start routing these wires around here in the corner, and I'm going to stay on the top. And the reason for that, I want to stay away from those filament wires, and I want to stay away from anything else. And it's perfect because it's actually feeding right on top of this resistor up here, and couldn't work out any better. Okay, this is one of those things that actually the slower you go, maybe the faster you go. You basically have to use a little bitty screwdriver and work it underneath the braid, and it's kind of like somebody's hair that's been braided or something. You're basically having to undo that all on the way, kind of working evenly on each side here. And I'll tell you, it's a slow, tedious process. It'll take about 10 minutes to strip that much, believe it or not, if you're going to do it right. You can take a knife and cut it down one side, but then you end up cutting half the sheathing. When you get to the end, you only have half the wiring you need. So just take it slow, work it just a little bit at a time, and you'll see what I mean. Then when you kind of get it down to where you want it, then you pull it all over on one side here. And you kind of start just twist it up really nice. And the fact I didn't cut this wire, I've still got all of my shielding, which I'm going to use to tie off to the bus there at the inputs. But you kind of see what I'm after. Now I got this one to do. And now you can see here, get it close here. Brought both the center wires down here to the left and right wiper of this thing on the bottom here, and then the two center leads, brought them over here to, the outer braids, brought them over here to ground, and I kind of tinned the braids all along the way, so they're good and solid at this point, won't fray anymore. So I'm happy with how that turned out, to be quite honest. Okay, and the last part we had to do was from pin number 6 right here. We had to feed an 82K feedback resistor around and tie it in right here into the 8 ohm tap for the speaker jack. And similarly here with pin number 3, there's our 82K, ran it all the way around, and then brought this wire over here and soldered it in right here. So we've got our negative feedback loop. And if I'm not mistaken, at this point, we've done our inputs here. And now we've done this 82K feedback. We've done this. I think we have gotten it all finished. Okay, one last thing I would tell you is before you power this thing up, I would literally walk one end to the other again. I'm going to do that. And make sure that each and every component is soldered where you think it should. Because I found one earlier where I thought I had soldered it to number 2, and then I'd actually soldered it to pin number 3, and it wasn't until later, till I went to hook some to pin number 3, that I realized, oh heck, I've got something in that slot already, and I realized I put some in the wrong slot. So walk the whole thing, both sides, front, back, again, just to make sure. And then at that point you can power the thing up. But just thought I'd show you what it's looking like. I think this thing is sexy. Love the colors on it. We put in this thing 2 brand new RCA 807s, tube-wise here. We've got some Jan CHS 6SN7 GT Sylvania VT231s. I've got a 5U4 G Coke bottle here to kind of match up with the or ST bottle to kind of match up with the output tubes here. And then the only other thing I would tell you, I'm not 100% sure on yet. I thought I'd get the amp running. I'm not sure what I want to do with this light yet. I was doing some testing with those blue LEDs I was going to use here, and in the dark, and it just kind of blinded you, and I'm afraid it would take away from the rest of the amp. So I may go with something a little more subtle here, or I may just cover over that with a nameplate or something. I'm not 100% sure yet. But hey, there's 2 more things to solder. You got to get these plate wires to the plates of these 807s. So best thing to do is just kind of mount these things on here, figure out how long they are, cut them, and go from there. We're going to do that. Okay, and there's the final product. Spin this thing around. I think it looks just great all the way around, to be honest. The back side of it here, you can see. Nice speaker jacks on both sides, nice silver plated RCA input jacks, our IAC connector here. Like I said, if I had to do anything different, I'd probably pull these 2 transformers back about 1 inch, and they'd be back here a little further. Give you a little more working room on the front end, but tell you what, you're going to have to stay tuned till the next video. We'll power this thing up and bench test it. Thanks for watching, everyone.